Hi, I'm Jen Blankenship, and I'm a clinical scientist at VivoSense. In this presentation, we'll discuss how digital clinical measures can accelerate and advance Alzheimer's disease drug development. We'll discuss some key considerations and opportunities for digital health in the context of Alzheimer's disease. VivoSense is a company that develops and validates real-world digital clinical measures and provides services and solutions for regulated clinical trials. Our services can span the entire trial. We can come in the beginning and assist and inform clinical trial design. Our clinical operations team supports ongoing clinical trials and provides high-touch project management and clinical trial management to ensure high-quality data collection. We also have a software platform that's compliant and is able to ingest, clean, analyze, and interpret data from almost any wearable sensor. VivoSense has an active R&D team which is working across multiple therapeutic areas to develop and validate digital clinical measures that are meaningful to patients, measurable with wearable sensors, and clinically relevant. Currently, we have projects ongoing in Alzheimer's disease, which I'll highlight at the end of this presentation. We're going to go through 4 key objectives in this presentation. First, we'll talk about the unmet need in Alzheimer's disease and how digital clinical measures can address these current issues. We'll talk about how meaningful aspects of health can be translated into measurable outcomes. And I'll present some promising candidate digital clinical measures and some considerations to facilitate their acceptance in Alzheimer's disease drug development. I'll conclude this presentation by highlighting VivoSense's ongoing work to advance digital clinical measures in Alzheimer's disease. So the digital revolution is underway and has been for over a decade. Wearable sensors and connected technology are at the forefront driving this revolution forward. Now, there has certainly been some accelerations in this momentum from the recent pandemic. And this, I think that in general, the pandemic has highlighted how these types of technologies can expand reach to underserved and diverse populations, capture patients in their real-world environment, and uncover novel insights on patient health and therapeutic benefits that really aren't possible with traditional clinical trial designs. Alzheimer's disease drug development faces many challenges, and one of them, I think the most striking, is that compared to other leading causes of disease, Alzheimer's disease has the lowest rates of success in drug development. When we look at traditional endpoints that are used in clinical trials, they include cognitive and functional outcomes, but these are really slow to change, requiring very long clinical trials that take a lot of patients' time. In 2021, the FDA granted accelerated approval for Aduhelm based on efficacy on a surrogate endpoint. And this has ignited a lot of debate in the medical community with questions of whether an expensive drug is worth prescribing to patients if there's an absence of evidence that it actually improves patient daily living. And this debate really highlights the importance of patient-centric endpoints and the lack thereof in the context of Alzheimer's disease. And so there is a positive pressure and a need to identify novel patient-centric endpoints that advance drug development and deliver treatments to patients that who need it the most. Wearable sensors and connected technologies can be used to derive digital clinical measures, which capture how patients feel and function in their own real-world environment. Because these tools are very low burden and easy to use, they can capture data continuously, passively, and in any setting, particularly in a patient's own home environment. When we think about using this type of technology in drug development, there are lots of opportunities to better characterize disease manifestations with high levels of granularity, detect treatment effects more efficiently with ecologically relevant endpoints, and support post-market surveillance efforts. Now, we know that there are significant opportunities to advance drug development with these types of technologies, but there are so many so many things on the market right now, and it's hard to decide what is important to measure. So how do you go about doing that? How do you choose what to measure and how to measure it? The best way to do that is to start with the patient. So patient-focused drug development is a approach that systematically incorporates the patient's voice in every aspect of the drug development process. This starts with evaluating patient experience data, which can come from multiple sources. In that experience, we need to identify common themes. So what are the most burdensome symptoms that patients experience? How is their daily life impacted? And how do patients define what a meaningful change in their health is? There are structured frameworks that have been developed to translate patient reports to measurable outcomes. And you can see this one, which is highlighted on the screen from Manta and colleagues, that takes what patients define as the aspects of disease that they don't want to become worse, want to improve, or want to prevent, those meaningful aspects of health, narrows it into measurable concepts of interest, and then from those concepts of interest, identify specific measurable characteristics which will turn into your outcome measures. In clinical research, you then turn those outcome measures into endpoints, which can be statistically analyzed and have a specific use. There has been some work done in meaningful aspects of health in Alzheimer's disease. So the Us Against Alzheimer's Association conducted what is called the What Matters Most study. This was a mixed method study that recruited patients with Alzheimer's disease of varying levels of severity and their caregivers. And they asked them simply, what are the aspects of their disease that matter most to them? And from this evaluation, the What Matters Most study found 42 meaningful aspects of health. The most common or frequently reported symptoms or most important symptoms, meaningful aspects of health were memory and forgetfulness, concerns about an uncertain future, and declining ability to function independently. What's even more striking is that when those meaningful aspects of health were mapped to frequently used clinical outcome assessments, they found that the most meaningful symptoms and impacts of Alzheimer's disease are not comprehensively captured by frequently used COAs. Now, this is a big gap in our ability to assess patients with Alzheimer's disease, and so thinking about ways that we can address this gap and unmet need is critical. Wearable sensors and other digital health technologies may provide a way to address this gap, but currently using the evidence that we have with the meaningful aspects of health in Alzheimer's disease, translating that to measurable digital clinical outcome measures is challenging because the evidence is insufficient and does not have a sufficient level of detail to understand what we should be measuring in these patients. So on the screen is a quote from a patient from the What Matters Most study. They said, "I find myself being a little more of a homebody than before. I used to go out all the time and do things, so I just find myself staying at home more." From this quote, we can pick out that Alzheimer's disease has limited their ability to do different activities, but we don't know what kinds of activities they were previously able to do. They also report staying at home more. But when they stay at home, what are the types of activities that are most frequently performed? By better understanding exactly what patients are doing or what they used to be able to do or want to be able to do, we can better narrow down what is actually measurable with a wearable sensor. Of course, when considering adding any type of technology into a clinical trial in a clinical population, it's important and critical to evaluate the feasibility and acceptability of that technology. So you can do this many ways. One is to conduct focus groups and ask patients if a certain type of technology or category of technology is acceptable to them, what are the potential barriers that they can predict, or what are the supporting elements they might need in a clinical trial to allow them to succeed using that tool. Another way that you can do this is actually deploy that technology in a pilot or small trial in a subset of patients to identify how they actually interact with it or use it. So if we think about a wearable sensor that's passively collecting data continuously, we can look at how much time someone does not spend wearing the sensor. So this is on the screen is a figure from Godkin et al., where they collected data on 39 patients with a range of neurodegenerative diseases, including individuals with Alzheimer's disease, and asked them to wear 5 different sensors at 5 different body locations. And they quantified how much time patients were spent not wearing the device, or percent non-wear time. And what you can see is that most of those dots representing the average non-wear time over the 6-day measurement period was relatively low. However, there is some variability in different patients, and so understanding what are the factors that facilitate or impede and prevent someone from being compliant or wearing the sensor continuously at a given wear location is important. It's also critical to really understand how wear time and acceptability and feasibility change over extended periods of time that are similar to what may be used in clinical trials. So maintaining functional independence is very important to patients with Alzheimer's disease, but right now there's a limited way to capture that with the current tools. So how can we more directly capture function in real-world environments, and using and leveraging the advantages of wearable sensors and different connected technologies? So I'm going to shift gears at this point and talk and highlight some promising candidate digital clinical measures that are on the horizon for Alzheimer's disease. Physical function is another outcome important for patients with Alzheimer's disease, and it's generally captured by measuring gait performance through tests like the 6-minute walk test or gait speed tests. But these have really limited ecological validity. They don't tell us how patients are actually performing in their environments. Wearable sensors provide us with a way to do just that. They can be worn continuously and capture physical behaviors while patients are doing what they normally do. And so VivoSense developed a measure of physical function called the Best 6-Minute Effort, which is a real-world free-living measure whose concept is based on the 6-minute walk test. But instead of asking patients to walk continuously for 6 minutes, we look for the 6-minute window where patients exerted their maximal effort. And this is advantageous because it allows for long-term tracking of real-world functional outcomes that you can look at changes in baseline over time, or detect oscillations or variations day to day that may signal changes in a patient's ability to navigate their own real world. Another measure that we can think about applying in Alzheimer's disease is capturing turning behaviors. So if we think back to the quote from the patient earlier in this presentation, they report that they spend more time at home. And when we think about how walking is performed in the home and outdoors and out of the home, turning is a major differentiator. So the images on the screen you'll see are courtesy of PAL Technologies, a wearable sensor company that manufactures a sensor that's worn on the thigh. Outdoor walking paths are generally characterized by long segments with very few turns. But if you think about when you're existing in your own home, indoor walking patterns generally have much shorter segments and are comprised of many turns that happen frequently over that walking path. So using turning could be a way to capture whether someone is walking in or out of the home, and may be an ecologically relevant and novel measure of functional independence for patients with Alzheimer's disease. Cognitive function is generally captured using some kind of active assessment where you ask patients to complete a questionnaire or interact with something. There's exciting work being done that's moving towards passive measurements to capture cognitive function using tools like smartphones and analyzing how someone types on their smartphone. So this is a study from a group of patients with multiple sclerosis compared to individuals who were healthy controls. And what they did in this study was looked at timing-related keystroke features. So how much time elapsed between pressing different keys on a keyboard, or how much time elapsed after typing a punctuation mark. And you can think about how these types of measures might give us some indication of cognitive function. Now, the study was done in MS and not in Alzheimer's disease, but the findings from this study are really promising, as they saw that these keystroke features differentiated patients who had MS from healthy controls, and that these keystroke features were also correlated with disability scores, as you can see on that figure on the screen. So very promising and exciting work being done to capture cognitive function passively. So this final portion of the talk is really dedicated to how VivoSense is committed to advancing digital health solutions for Alzheimer's disease. And I'll highlight some of our ongoing work here in these next couple of slides. VivoSense is engaged in a project in collaboration with the Digital Medicine Society, which aims to develop a core set of digital measures for Alzheimer's disease. Now, currently, there's no consensus on what should be measured in patients with Alzheimer's disease in clinical trials and how you should measure it. And so this project is bringing together digital health solutions partners from the technology sector, industry, patients, providers, payers, to come together to identify, one, what are the meaningful aspects of health in Alzheimer's disease? How does that differ by stakeholder? What are the ways that we can measure these meaningful aspects of health? And how can we better define a consensus set of measures that will be disseminated and broadly adopted in the future to advance clinical care and research in Alzheimer's disease? In addition to our collaboration with the Digital Medicine Society, VivoSense is working on developing and validating new methods to derive features of gait and walking behavior from wearable sensors. I mentioned previously that physical function is traditionally assessed by gait performance during in-clinic walking tests. But right now there is a limited way to capture gait accurately and precisely using wearable sensors in patients with Alzheimer's disease, and really broadly the aging population, or those who have slower walking speeds. And so we have a pilot grant which has been selected for conditional funding through the Massachusetts AI and Technology Center to use rigorous methods to develop and validate algorithms that can derive these characteristics of gait and walking behavior that are currently not available. And our plan is to take those measures and capture and examine differences in how walking behaviors are performed in patients with Alzheimer's disease and healthy aging older adults to begin to establish clinical meaningfulness of these real-world digital clinical measures of walking. The goal of VivoSense's R&D program is to take digital clinical measures through the FDA COA qualification pathway. Now, to get a COA qualification, you need evidence that starts by demonstrating that these measures are meaningful to patients, that can be derived accurately in real-world environments, and they are clinically valid and related to key outcome measures in that patient population. This is a big task and requires a lot of evidence and many years of work. But it's not the only way to facilitate adoption of digital clinical measures in patients with Alzheimer's disease. One other way is to do this in early phase clinical trials by deploying novel digital clinical measures as exploratory endpoints, where you can collect these data simultaneously with other accepted clinical outcome measures and begin to examine and explore how these outcomes are potentially related to key clinical outcomes and key accepted clinical outcomes in patients with Alzheimer's disease. By advancing our ways to capture patients in how patients are feeling and functioning in their real-world environment is only going to improve our ability to deliver treatments that make a difference and a real true impact on their daily living. And that's the goal at the end of the day, isn't it? So thank you for your attention during this presentation. If you have any questions about any of the content we've discussed today, please reach out to someone on the VivoSense team and we'd be happy to set up a call. Thanks.